So Office Space is a thing. If you're here, you're probably already familiar with this movie, but if not, Office Space is a workplace comedy that has become a cult classic. Although it has transformed into much more of a period piece because of its age, it's no less hilarious and still incredibly relevant. If you're still unconvinced, then I'll just say that this show was like a predecessor to The Office, but better. And that'll get a few people to at least hate watch this movie. But it's true, Office Space predates both the American and British Office, and explores a lot of the same ideas about the workplace. It's strange that the movie is so unknown when The Office was such a huge success only a few years later, but whatever, it was before its time. And yet somehow it's very of its time. You'll see what I mean when I get to the summary, but it even has Friends-era Jennifer Aniston, and people love her. And her hair. I saw this movie only a couple of years after it came out. I was in middle school at a sleepover, and the movie's crude humor and the fact that they openly talked about sex made it exciting in that kind of taboo way, but it became something that my friends and I would quote regularly.
Yeah, I believe you have my stapler.
Little did I know that many years later this movie would continue to pop up in pop culture for those in the know. And on a whim, I decided I was going to rewatch it to see if it holds up, and the short answer is yes, it does. Despite being almost 25 years old, the movie still has excellent comedic timing. It's a bit sexist, which I don't care for, but the characters that do this are assholes anyway. But that aside, the comedy in this movie also spoke to me as a working adult. The movie is clearly overly concerned with the way that offices are run and the people within them. I found that I had much more in common with the characters because I understood the plight of the working person, which made me enjoy the comedy even more. But beyond the humor and the understanding of the workplace, I also found an interesting philosophical underpinning to the movie. Because of course I did. I'm a philosopher and that's what I do on this channel. Office Space is a movie about work and labor and the disquiet that everyday people go through, represented by the characters hitting their breaking point, sometimes with hilarious results. But the real genius of the movie is the way it depicts the way that work and labor can cause people to become hollow or even to snap. And it does this in the way that work is presented to the characters and their feelings towards work, the way corporations are presented, and the movie's overall thesis about work. This movie is an absolute genius depiction of philosophy and Marxist labor. And so today, I want to talk about Office Space. Legendary comedy writer, producer, actor, and filmmaker Mike Judge had already made a name for himself with the creation of the raunchy Beavis and Butthead in the early 90s. And he was knee-deep in his second hit show, King of the Hill, when he opted to take some time off between seasons to write a full-length movie script based on a cartoon character he had created early in his career. Milton was a set of short cartoons about the titular character working in an office and had aired as a part of Mad TV. The story was based on some of the people Judge had met while working dead-end jobs in the late 80s while trying to make his break into film and television. Now, with more than a modicum of success, Judge returned to the world of that character with a mind to create a live-action script. With Fox already happy with the work Judge had done, they opted to give the project a modest budget as long as they could give input. The focus of the story was changed to an ensemble cast as well as a small love story, but all of the characters were to some extent still inspired by people Judge had worked with in the past. Most of the cast were selected from less well-known actors, Gary Cole being the most famous for his television and voice roles, with the exception of Jennifer Aniston, who was happy to be cast in something smaller because it was so different from what she had previously done. When filming began, Judge opted to shoot in Dallas and Austin, Texas, rather than on Wall Street, as was suggested. He felt the movie should reflect how every city and suburban town was adopting the same offices and dead-end tech industry jobs, and that the movie should feel like it could be anywhere in the United States, rather than the slick and recognizable businesses of New York City. Office Space was released in 1999 and had what might possibly be the best example of mismatched marketing I've ever seen. The posters have no reference to any of the characters, only showing a man covered in post-it notes. And unlike the mainstream comedy of the time, the film wasn't full of hilarious gags and funny one-liners. As a result, the film's release was considered a failure. Over the next couple of weeks, the box office did pick up and there was a noticeable upwards trend in viewership, but Fox opted to cut its losses and took the movie out of theaters rather quickly. Despite its status as a failure, Office Space managed to stay relatively relevant. Through word of mouth, audiences shared their love for the movie, and its release on home video and reruns on Comedy Central bolstered its cult status. Office Space has wormed its way into the zeitgeist, where it is regularly referenced by other media and influenced the way people think and even speak about labor.
Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
Judge has gone on to work on many other shows and movies, including Idiocracy and Silicon Valley, but still claims that Office Space is one of the projects he is most proud of. Before we can get to that sweet, sweet Marxism, it's important to have some context, so in the event you've not seen Office Space, this is your spoiler warning. Peter Gibbons is a software engineer at a nondescript generic company called Initech. He spends his days at work trying to actually get something done, only to be constantly interrupted by other employees.
If Sandra's going to listen to her headphones while she's falling, then I should be able to listen to the radio while I'm collating.
His bosses.
Did you see the memo about this? Did you get that memo?
And the other random office bullshit.
Corporate accounts payable, Nina speaking. Just a moment. Corporate accounts payable, Nina speaking.
Despite the workday barely starting, Peter visits his friends Michael Bolton.
Wow, is that your real name?
And Samir Naginanajar, hoping for some solace in the drudgery of work. Drinking coffee at a generic chain restaurant, Peter bemoans his work life and the fact that he is pretty certain his girlfriend is cheating on him. Because of this, Peter is too scared to even approach the pretty waitress he sees every day. When it looks like he might actually work up the courage to do something, the group are interrupted by a coworker with the news that Initech is restructuring, which is obvious corporate lingo for letting people go. Michael, Peter, and Samir now realize that their job security is basically non-existent in the long term, and in the short term, Peter is convinced that his boss, Bill Lumberg, is going to ask him to work Saturday. Dissatisfied and disillusioned, Peter confides in his neighbor, the jovial construction worker Lawrence. Lawrence gives Peter the idea to avoid his boss on Friday, so he won't be able to ask Peter to work Saturday. But despite his best efforts, Peter is accosted by the various bullshit of his office, and Lumberg winds up asking him to work both Saturday and Sunday. That night, while at a therapist with his girlfriend to help them with their issues, Peter undergoes hypnotherapy in order to stop caring about things that cause him stress. But before the therapist can finish, he keels over and dies, leaving Peter in a perpetual state of apathy towards the things he hates in life. As a result of this, Peter chooses not to go into work on Saturday or Sunday. His girlfriend breaks up with him, and Peter spends the weekend catching up on sleep and not giving two shits about anything. When Monday rolls around, Peter goes to the restaurant and meets the waitress Joanna and asks her out on the spot. Joanna also hates her job and is intrigued by Peter's newfound peace over not caring about work. Initech begins bringing in two guys named Bob to conduct interviews for the restructuring. Michael and Samir are freaking out, but Peter cruises into the office late, just in time for his interview, and basically blows it off. The two Bobs also find out that Milton was fired, but never taken off the payroll.
I didn't receive my paycheck this week.
You're gonna have to talk to payroll about that.
As a result of the interviews, Peter finds out that they want to promote him because his attitude shift appears to make him look like he isn't being challenged enough. But they want to fire Michael and Samir.
So you're gonna fire Michael and Samir and you're gonna give me more money? Wow.
Peter finds this unfair and tells Samir and Michael what will happen. In a drunken brainstorming session, the trio come up with a way to basically put the rounded off numbers that occur during every transaction into a single account.
This sounds familiar. Yeah, they did in Superman 3.
The trio begins celebrating the fact that they've taken back their lives, only to realize that there was a mistake in the program concerning decimals, and they have now stolen a lot of money. Also, pro tip, don't name your virus program Virus. Meanwhile, Lumberg is still exploiting Milton, whose threats go unnoticed. Panicking, Peter lashes out at his friends and even Joanna, only to come to the realization that he has to care about some things, including work, and will have to face the reality of what he did. He decides he's going to take the fall for Michael and Samir in order to make amends. He apologizes to Joanna and then writes a letter, and along with the money bonds, puts them in an envelope under Lumberg's door, knowing they will probably come and arrest him. When Monday rolls around, Peter shows up to work only to find that, true to his word, Milton actually finally burned the building down. The letter and the bonds are gone, and Initech is no longer a company, meaning Peter and his friends are off the hook. Peter then gets a job working construction with Lawrence and says goodbye to his friends when they offer him a job at a competing tech company. Whenever the topic of labor comes up, I think it's pretty obvious that we're going to have to stop and talk about Karl Marx, or someone who took inspiration from him. It's important to remember that Marxism is just a lens that we use to critique systems of economics, politics, and power. And while Marx did write about communism as an alternative system of governing, this is not the same as the criticisms of capitalism that he wrote, which we collectively refer to as Marxism. Just wanted to get that out of the way so people don't confuse the two. Office Space is primarily concerned with the way that its characters feel about the jobs that they work. It's very clearly based off the tech companies that were prevalent in the 1990s and 2000s. To some extent, that kind of company has gone to the wayside. However, the tech industry is still very much around, and the nondescript tech company depicted in Office Space has been replaced by the tech startup, because everyone and their mother has an idea for an app. And that's partially why I think Initech itself, while being designed to be largely forgettable and clearly a facsimile of all the tech companies of the time, has allowed Office Space its longevity in pop culture. The technology may have moved way past the computers of the 1990s, but the way companies function in regards to labor hasn't really changed that much at all. And the result is that people who work in those industries are still treated the same and feel the same way as they did 25 years ago. I mean, it's not hard to see that Peter, Michael, and Samir are disillusioned and disenfranchised with their positions in life. They work what feels like meaningless jobs, but are of course forced to do them in order to make a living in their current economic system.
What if we're still doing this when we're 50?
It would be nice to have that kind of job security.
They are literally stuck in the system and cannot get out of it. They are constantly worried about their job, and yet they hate every moment that they're forced to spend there. I've talked about the way labor can be exploited in past episodes on Monsters, Inc. and Severance, but in this case I'm more interested in how the characters feel personally rather than how they are exploited. Don't you worry, we're gonna get back to the exploitation part. But this disillusion that the characters feel in Office Space is actually an incredibly accurate example of one of Marx's most important concepts. Alienation is the English translation of the German Entfremdung. Just gonna take a moment and apologize right there to all my German-speaking friends. Sometimes also called estrangement, this is the idea of an individual who has been separated from their own sense of being or sense of self. Alienation comes about in many different ways and can be forced upon a person in many different contexts. Objectification is one such form of alienation, but we tend to specify objectification as the alienation of a person in terms of how they are treated by another individual, particularly in how they are used or abused. And if you want to hear more about that, check out the episode I did on Friends with Benefits, or Who Framed Roger Rabbit. More often, alienation is used in regards to the way a person feels about the work or the way that they are alienated from themselves because of work. And this is why Office Space is such a perfect example, not just because we can clearly see that Peter, Michael, Samir, and their coworkers feel helpless and cannot change their situation, but in the details of how their jobs treat them. Marx broke down alienation into 4 parts. Each of them would cause some level of alienation, but when all 4 are present, an individual would be fully alienated from their own true being. And if you guess that Office Space has all 4, you'd be correct. And if you also guess that I'm going to break down each of them with examples, you are also correct. No prizes though. Sorry. The first way alienation occurs is through the lack of control over the product. Workers begin to feel alienated when they no longer have a tangible or measurable amount of control over the service or product they provide. And that doesn't mean that conceptual work will automatically cause alienation. What this means is that an individual is not in control of the service or product that they are responsible for laboring over. They either do not see the end product and its impact, or they have no input on how it is sold, used, or distributed, and the result is that they have no real interest or investment beyond completing the task at hand.
Now, if I work my ass off and Initech ships a few extra units, I don't see another dime. So where's the motivation?
What's more is, I don't think it's a coincidence that the movie never actually tells us what Initech does specifically, and I think that's the point. None of the employees seem to know, and even if they did, it wouldn't matter because they have no direct input on it anyway. This causes them only to be invested in the work that they need to do, and a sense of apathy as to what the outcome or benefit of that labor amounts to, so they start to feel alienated. They work for the sake of the work rather than to have any impact on the product or service that they're a part of. The second way alienation occurs is through the separation from productive activity. Peter in particular is a great example of this in the movie because his work has nothing to do with the product in any way.
I sit in a cubicle and I update bank software for the 2000 switch.
His job is literally to clean up the mess of other programmers because they either couldn't be bothered or didn't have the space to prepare programs for long-term use past the year 2000. As a result, Peter doesn't actually do anything meaningful. He isn't creating something new, nor is he really being challenged. On top of this, he is repeatedly asked to add another page to his TPS reports. This is a cover letter that's literally a glorified title page. We also know that it's not necessary because it's a new thing management has asked for its employees to do.
You see, we're putting the cover sheets on all TPS reports now before they go out.
It's just we're putting new cover sheets on all the TPS reports before they go out now.
So Peter is now being asked to do more work that adds nothing of value to the TPS report and uses up time that could be spent on getting more of his actual job done. And the only reason for this is because management wants it done a certain way. This is textbook busy work. It's unproductive and makes employees feel like they are laboring away at something that is meaningless, because it is meaningless. The third way that alienation occurs is through the removal or separation of one from other individuals. This one is a bit harder to see in the movie, but the use of cubicles while creating a desk space could also be seen as a way to stop people from communicating or interacting with others. But if you think this is too much of a stretch, then I have another example. Look at the way Milton's desk is systematically moved from place to place until he eventually winds up in the basement. On a broader scale, we might look at the way office managers in all industries see talking as antithetical to work being done. If you spend too much time at the water cooler socializing, then you are not doing work. Thus, a lot of office work is seen to be individual, and bosses see socialization as time not devoted to work and therefore not productive. People are forced to not interact in order to get work done and are alienated from their own social nature, despite the fact that humans are communal creatures. The fourth and final way alienation occurs is through the separation from conscientious or creative work. People want to be creatively fulfilled or feel like the thing that they are working towards will make the world a better place. This is not quite the same thing as meaningful work. That has more to do with the feeling of accomplishing something. Conscientious or creative work is about being secure in the knowledge that what you're doing will have an impact in the wider world, that you are achieving something that makes the world a better place and will bring joy to other individuals, either ethically or artistically. This kind of work brings satisfaction of a different kind, but when there is a lack of it, people feel like there's no purpose to their labor. Because we have no idea what Initech does as a business, we, the audience, and possibly the employees, are at a loss as to whether their work is making any kind of difference in their community. What's more, we know that Peter's work doesn't really make any discernible difference. All he's doing is preparing for the Y2K, which has no impact on his wider community, and even within the work community, he's maintaining a status quo rather than making work easier or better. So Peter, and a lot of the people he works with, are not making any creative or life-altering contributions to the world, and so they feel like their work is pointless to society. To some extent or another, the characters in the movie are affected by all four forms of alienation, and this is often how exploitative work feels, and if you've ever felt this way about your work, you know that it sucks. It also feels like this isn't the way it's supposed to be, and yet we continue to work like this. Marx wrote about this in an attempt to try and point out the dangers of this kind of work on individuals. If people become so unsatisfied with work, they become like the characters in the movie. They are likely to dread their own work, which means they're less effective at work. It would seem that the key to creating a more prosperous workforce for any company would be to eliminate alienation. The problem is that distributing work in a way that alienates people is cheaper. That's why corporations do it. Employees can't be given control over the product or service because then profit would need to be split to some extent. Work is distributed in a way where everyone has a role that they complete for the benefit of the manager or owner or CEO or whatever. And the creation of the product or service isn't always one that's meant to be meaningful to society. More often than not, it's meant to just make money and is not actually helpful. So for these reasons, alienation continues in the workforce. There is still, however, the problem of workers feeling alienated, and so some entrepreneuring capitalists have come up with ways to deal with this by trying to build community and bring the idea of meaningful labor into the office or workspace. This is when we get to the exploitation part I was talking about earlier. At Initech, this is implemented poorly, as it is in so many real-world places.
Oh, and remember, next Friday is Hawaiian Shirt Day.
Because the idea of wearing a different shirt feels like it should be creative. But obviously this is a poor attempt. More effective, but sinister, is the way that Joanna's place of business expects her to wear flair to show her personality. This is presented as the idea of fun in order to show off who you really are and have meaningful interactions, but it slowly starts to become more sinister because the minimum is never enough.
Okay, but some people choose to wear more, and we encourage that.
So the way to make employees feel like they're part of a community or let them express themselves on the job has become a mandatory part of the job. The creativity of the flair is now another part of the job in which Joanna has to contend with or be seen as lesser because she's only doing the bare minimum.
If you want me to wear 37 pieces of flair, why don't you just make the minimum 37 pieces of flair?
The way bosses treat employees has also changed from authoritative to much more subversive. They want to be seen as your friend, but a boss is not your friend. They have direct control and oversight over your work and should not be seen as friendly, and this can be dangerous. But look at the way Lumberg talks to Peter using a friendly demeanor despite being his boss.
We lost some people this week, and we need to sort of play catch-up.
Notice how even the language that was used was deliberate in order to come across as though Peter would be a team player for coming into work and help the community, while it's still clear that this is an order rather than a request. Joanna's boss does the same thing, using a passive-aggressive tone because it's harder to rebel against this than a direct order. The implication from both bosses is that Peter and Joanna will be letting down their community or won't be showing enough fun personality, when in actuality these are just disguises for outright exploitation. Even today, we see the same kind of tactics with hip new startups having open concept workplaces and cereal bars. Sure, they seem like cool amenities, but they're just ways of trying to make workplaces less alienating without having to shell out more money by actually paying employees more. Having a cereal bar or a pretzel day is cheaper than offering higher compensation, and people eat this shit up. Mostly because pretzels and cereal are delicious, but also because it feels like the company cares about you. But they don't. Outside work events and parties such as the birthday scene are often used as ways to promote community, and if you don't attend and pretend to like the shitty cake, you're not the right fit and don't have a good attitude. The implication being that your job is on the line. At the end of the day, this is all just corporate propaganda to try and brainwash you into forgetting that you are unhappy and alienated from yourself because of the labor you do. There is, however, a bright side, even for Marx, and that's saying something because his work is often depressing. Surprisingly, Marx is not against the idea of labor. He just doesn't want labor to be exploitative, nor does he want it to alienate us from our well-being. Labor in itself, when it's not for the benefit of others or at our own expense, can be great, not just monetarily, but can actually be beneficial in terms of rectifying alienation. When an individual works in a way that gives them control over the product or service, is meaningful, includes communal aspects, and has a positive impact either ethically or creatively on the world, that labor can be very fulfilling. We see this as well in Office Space when Peter goes to work with Lawrence. In this case, we can see that Peter is enjoying the outdoors and working with his hands. You could infer that the point is manual labor is better, but I think this is too simplistic. The point is that manual labor is often the least obscured by alienation because working on an object with your hands means alienation is less likely to occur. But there are many forms of labor that can be fulfilling. Even a tech job like the ones we see in the movie can be fulfilling as long as the workplace or work itself is not obscured by one of the 4 ways alienation occurs. Meaningful work doesn't even necessarily have to be labor that one is compensated for, and this description is very close to the psychological idea of the flow state, which you can hear more about in this episode I did on Dark Souls. Now, I don't think it would be possible to find a job that didn't have some kind of alienation present. Not because the world is that awful, but simply because all jobs have parts that are necessary, but a little alienating. But I would suggest that working through one of the 4 parts of alienation in order to get back to the meaningful work would be worth it as long as the whole job isn't alienating all the time. That kind of work environment is untenable, like what we see at Initech. The results of this long-term alienation is that employees eventually give up and stop caring about work, or in extreme cases, burn the building down. Office Space is almost too good to be true when it comes to finding examples of alienation. Even though the movie is almost 25 years old and the technology has become passé, the way characters are forced into labor is still the same way that people are alienated today. The movie might be a comedy and the circumstances are created for humor, but alienation results in apathy, anger, resentment, and possibly retaliation. This movie has brilliant examples of the 4 ways that alienation occurs and even depicts the underhanded ways companies try to engage their employees into caring about their work without actually changing any of the ways that alienation occurs. It's a way smarter movie than people give it credit for, and that's because I don't think it was really ever just a comedy. It's an exploration of labor and exploitation of workers under the guise of a workplace comedy, and that's subversive as hell, and probably explains why the movie has only grown in popularity. And that is why Office Space is actually a hilarious warning against the dangers of alienation in the workplace. Here are my stray thoughts. The scene where Peter, Michael, and Samir destroy the printer is absolutely iconic, and I've often wanted to do exactly that with some printers and VCRs. Not just to recreate the scene, but also because there have been some printers that have really deserved it. Despite not being the focus of the story, I actually think that Joanna's side plot with the flair and the idea that companies want to manufacture and mandate creativity is very interesting and deserved more time. I also think that Tom's idea of a mat where you jump to conclusions is hilarious, because this is the kind of new age bullshit that CEOs would eat up and make their employees use in brainstorming sessions. Hey! Thanks so much for watching that episode. If you enjoyed it, remember to smash that like button like you're destroying that one printer or fax machine or whatever it is. You know the one I'm talking about. I didn't really get a chance to talk about the rap music that's so prevalent in this movie, but I really think it kind of sets the stage, especially when it's juxtaposed against all of that like white collar work. It really works. Don't forget to check out some of the other episodes I've got on Marxism, like Monsters, Inc. or Severance, and subscribe so you'll never miss another episode that comes out on those very same topics, or whatever else I got going on, right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.